Chapter 24 The Transformation of Western Europe. Chapter 24 sees the transformation of Europe culturally, politically, and religiously, the first of these events being the Protestant Reformation. This transformation not only changed European society at this time, but later influenced eras beyond this time period. The fragmentation of Western Christendom. The fragmentation of Europe through religion sees the rise of the Protestants and their reformations, and how it changed the prominence of Catholicism. The consolidation of new sovereign states sees an introduction to new forms of government and leaders, taking advantage of a broken Europe for their own power. European society saw a new growth and new reforms that were either economic or social, introducing new forms of economics called capitalism. European societies also experienced a change intellectually, as new ways of thinking emerged because of the revolutions in science, which led to the emergence of the Enlightenment.
I'm going to first talk about the fragmentation of Western Christianism shown in chapter 24. The Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther King was an American Baptist minister and activist who became a visible spokesman. He attracted the sales of indulgence as an individual and attracted support from others who resented the policies of the Roman Church as well. His backstory is being a prolific and talented writer, which benefited in the end which leads on to the press. He benefited enormously from the press first appearing in Europe in the mid-15th century. The press of European cities and towns eagerly printed works on the religious as well as secular themes, while Martin and his supporters took matters into their own hands. It then got the Roman Empire involved, which Luther soon moved on. Beyond the issue of indulgence, he attacked the Roman Church for a wide range of abuse. It had put an end to priestly authority. Several princesses from the Roman Empire warmed to Luther's view. It was mostly because they got a lot of personal conflict, but then they offered the people opportunities to build their own power. Which this is a picture right here of just like an image of what it looked. Well, then there wasn't clouds, so like what it like a symbolism of what it looked like. And this is an actual picture taken of Martin Luther King right here, and to all the people that gathered around because they agreed with him. Reform outside Germany. First, we're going to start talking about the Lutheran Christianity. By the mid-16th century, about half the German population had adopted Lutheran Christianity. They have launched Protestant movements and established alternative churches in other regions. By the late 1520s, many responded to Protestant appeals. It then got Henry VIII involved because when the Protestants worked to build a following in England from 1520s, they had faced a scout government resistance until King Henry VIII came in conflict with the Pope. The issue was that Henry wanted to divorce his wife since she didn't born a male here, but the Pope didn't really agree with it, which made Henry upset, and he then went to become an English Pope to go against it. By the 1560s, England had permanently left the Roman Catholic community during the change, and even more in the influential Reformation was taking shape with other communities. Which then we'll move on to the topic of John Calvin. John Calvin was a French lawyer who in 1530 converted to Protestant Christianity. He didn't agree with the French monarchy and helped organize Protestant communities and worked with local officials to impose a strict code on the city. Calvinist missionaries were most active in France, and they also attracted interest in other major cities. They established churches in the new lands, and in the late 16th century, Lutherans, Anglicans, and Calvinists together have built communities large enough to a return to religious unity in Western Christianism was unconvincible. And this is like a symbol of like a picture of John Calvin right here.
The consolidation of sovereign states. The 10th Revival Empire. Charles V reigned from 1519 to 5056 as the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. He did not establish a long-lasting imperial legacy as emperor. He used his army not to extend his authority, but rather used it only for rebellion. Ottomans and French saw the Holy Roman Empire as a threat, so they set up many obstacles to forestall the possibility of Charles V extending his authority. He lost his reign in 5056. The new monarchs. The new monarchs included Henry VI of England, Louis XI and Francis I of France, and Ferdinand and Isabel of Spain. The new monarchs imposed royal fees to help better their wealth. With the new power, they were able to build armies that the French and Spanish used to increase their power. By doing this, they gained the respect of the nobles. Constitutional states. Constitutional government came to England after political and religious disputes that led to the English Civil War. In 1641, Parliament and King were at odds with each other and caused both of them to start raising armies. As a result, Parliament put Oliver Cromwell in charge of the Parliament army. Absolute monarchies. The most known absolute monarchy in England was the French monarchy, and it was led by Louis XIV. They weren't the only absolute monarchy, as Spanish, Austrian, and Persian rulers also embraced similar policies. The most important of the Roman Testards was Peter I, rightly known as Peter the Great, who introduced the state of transformation. In 1697 through 1698, he led the large body of Russian observers on a tour of Germany, the Netherlands, and England to learn about the Western European administrative methods and military technology. The European state system. The 30 Years of Wars demonstrated the chaos and devastation that conflict could bring. In an effort to avoid tearing the society apart, European states ended the 30 Years of War with the Peace of Westphalia. The Peace of Westphalia did not end the war in Europe, and it continued into the 7 Years of War. The 7 Years of War lasted from 1756 to 1763, and it pitted France, Austria, and Russia against Britain and Persia, and it emerged with conflicts between France and Britain in India and North America to become a global war for imperial supremacy. Frequent wars and balance of power of diplomacy drained the resources of individual states but strengthened European society as a whole.
During early capitalist society, capitalism generated considerable wealth, but its effects were uneven and sometimes unsettling. Economic development and increasing prosperity were noticeable in Western Europe, and early capitalism encouraged social change and sometimes required painful adjustments to new conditions. Um, Next slide. Okay. Okay. Population and urbanization. Some American food crops that increased during these times were potatoes, which probably didn't inspire much romantic art, but they provided a good source of carbohydrates for peasants and laborers who were having trouble keeping up with the rising price of bread. Um, American maize also made its way to Europe. Maize mostly served as livestock feed for livestock rather than feed for human consumption. Other American crops, such as tomatoes and peppers, added vitamins and tangy flavor to European diets. Um, Moving on to population growth. Although European birth rates did not rise dramatically in early modern times, decreasing mortality resulted in rapid population growth. And the population in Europe rose to 100 million in the 16th century after the recovery of the epidemic plague. Okay, and population growth and rapid urbanization helped spur a round of remarkable economic development, and it was an emergence of capitalism. Duh. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Okay, early capitalism and pro proton industrialization. Uh, hmm, okay, so um, okay, so stock exchange arose, and inventors could buy and sell shares in joint stocks companies and trade in other commodities as well. And private parties organized an array of institutions and services to support early capitalism. And European merchants and entrepreneurs transformed their society, uh, and their desire to accumulate wealth and relate profits was by no means new. Okay, capitalism did not develop in a political vacuum, and merchants were especially influential in the affairs of English and Dutch states. I'm pretty sure, yeah. Um, Chartered joint stock companies and out- authorized some of them to explore, conquer, and colonize. The early capitalism developed in the context of imperialism. Capitalism also encouraged European entrepreneurs to organize new ways to manufacture goods, and European people established fortified trading posts in Asia and colon, co- colonial regions. Okay, so capitalism entrepreneurs seeking profits found guilds cumbersome and inflexible. Um, for the putting out system, they relied on urban artists, and the entrepreneurs paid workers for their service, picked up the finished goods, and sold them on the markets. Rurals, rurals was usually plentiful. Entrepreneurs spent relatively little on wages and realized handsome profits on their ventures. Yeah. Historians refer the 17th and 18th century as proton industrialization, and the putting out system remained a prominent feature of European society until the rise of industrial factories in the 19th century. As a result, they actively discouraged competition and sometimes resisted technological um, innovation. And craft guilds had monopolized the production of goods such as textiles and metalwares in European towns and cities.
Science and Enlightenment. The reconception of the universe. Until the 17th century, European astronomers had based their understandings of the universe on the works of the Greek scholar Claudius Ptolemy of Alexandria. Ptolemy had envisioned a universe where the other planets of the solar system were circling the Earth. This is what society believed to be true, until in 1543 a Polish astronomer by the name of Nicholas Copernicus published an article named "On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres" that had completely went against Ptolemy's theory. Copernicus had argued that, rather than the Earth being at the center of the universe, it was the Sun, and that the Earth, as well as the other planets, revolved around the Sun as well. This theory of Copernicus was not treated very well, as it went against many religious beliefs and contradicted many other scientific theories about the Earth. The Scientific Revolution. Due to Copernicus's outrageous theory, it allowed scholars to open up to new ideas about the Earth and use evidence to support whether or not Copernicus' theory could be true, until the works of two mathematicians, Galileo Galilei and Johannes Kepler, had proven that the Ptolemaic universe was wrong. Kepler had shown that planetary orbits are elliptical and not circular, as shown in Ptolemy's theory. Galileo had proven that the planets were far from perfect by using one of the earliest models of the telescope. Galileo had also helped contribute to the understanding of terrestrial planets' motion. But he was not as good of a mathematician like Isaac Newton, who depended on accurate observations and mathematical reasoning to make powerful synthesis of astronomy and mechanics. Newton was able to explain how the tides in the sea moved due to the moon and the movements of the planets that were caused by the gravitational presence of the sun. Isaac Newton's work had symbolized the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment. Isaac Newton's vision was so extraordinary that its influence went far beyond science, that it had created a movement known as the Enlightenment. People of the Enlightenment sought to discover natural laws, govern human society in the same way that Newton's laws of universal gravitation and motion regulated the universe. John Locke discovered the natural laws of politics. Adam Smith covered economic affairs, and the Baron of Montesquieu would establish a science of politics. The center of the Enlightenment was in France, and people of the Enlightenment were called philosophes. Voltaire was one of these many philosophes. Voltaire championed the individual freedom and attacked any institution sponsoring intolerant or oppressive behaviors. Most philosophers were optimistic about the future of the world and humanity. Philosophers believed that knowledge of human affairs would advance as fast as modern science and bring about a new era of constant progress. This was known as the theory.
Alright, this is chapter 30, the making of an industrial revolution. One of the key topics we will go over is the patterns of industrialization, and this is when technology innovations help improve society. Another key topic we'll go over is the industrial society, and this is when society started using items such as factories to produce manufactured goods.
Okay, the making of industrial society. Okay, so the foundation of the industrializations, there was high agricultural productivity in these regions, which resulted in significant population growth, and high population densities in turn encouraged occupational specialization and permitted many individuals to learn a task other than conservation. Okay, good. Okay, the factory system. Factory production strongly encouraged the emergence of new divisions of labor, and the need to invest in increasingly expensive equipment encouraged the formation of large businesses. Um, in the illustration, or like it referred to the process that transformed handcraft-centered economies, and uh, yeah, I think that is that one. Wait, next slide. Okay, the early spread of industrialization. This started in the 19th century, but by the mid 19th century, many giant corporations had joined together to control the trade through trust and cartels. And then during the 17th century, English consumers had become fond of I don't know how to say that, but it's Caliscus? Yeah. Inexpensive, brightly printed textiles imported from India. Um, by the 1800s, more than thousands of walk steam engines were in use in the British. Yeah, that too. And then, um, okay, so critical to industrialization were technological developments that made it possible to produce goods, and they had the need to invest in increasingly expensive equipment, which encouraged the formation of
Industrial society. The fruits of industry. The populations of European and Euro-American people had risen sharply during the 18th and 19th centuries. Between the 1700s and 1800s, the population of Europe had increased from 105 million to 180 million. Then, during the 19th century, it had more than doubled. The rapid population growth in both Europe and the Americas had reflected changing patterns of fertility and mortality. In most pre-industrial, fertility rates were high, but due to diseases and epidemics, mortality rates were even higher, especially child mortality, which is why there were never any explosive population growth in Europe or the Americas. In early industrializing societies, high birth rates were fairly common, but death rates had dropped drastically due to better diets within society and improved disease control. Beginning in the 19th century, industrializing lands had experienced a social change known as the demographic transition, which refers to the shifting patterns of fertility and mortality. As industrialization started to grow, the birth rate started to decline due to the amount of money it would cost to raise children in an industrialized society rather than an agricultural one. Urbanization and migration. Industrialization and population growth had strongly encouraged migration and urbanization, with industrialization on the rise. Migrants from all over the countryside flocked to urban areas in search of work. With urbanization on the rise, pollution intensified dramatically. The widespread burning of fossil fuels such as wood and coal contaminated the air with quantities of chemicals. This pollution led to typical occupational diseases among some jobs. No part of a city was ever immune to the effects of pollution. Constant stench in the air and polluted rivers. The pollution had gotten so bad that it even polluted water supplies and caused some areas to become unsanitary living conditions. Income determined the degree of comfort and security offered by city life. While workers moved from countryside to urban centers, rapid population growth in Europe encouraged massive migration to the Americas, and especially the United States. During the 19th century and early 20th century, about 50 million Europeans migrated to western part of the world. Many migrants had expected to only stay for a few years before returning back to their country with a modest fortune. Only about a third came back to Europe, while the rest transformed the Americas into Euro-American land. Industry and society. Industrialization radically altered traditional social structures. It encouraged the disappearance of slavery in lands undergoing industrialization. Industrialization also helped make new social classes. Captains of industry and enterprising business people became wealthy and powerful enough to completely overshadow the military and other privileged classes. Men and family had gained increased stature and responsibility in the industrial age as work dominated public life. Men's wages had also constituted the bulk of their family's income. Women had also worked long hours in pre-industrial times like men. When industry moved production from home to the factory, married women were unable to work unless they left their homes and children under someone else's care. In the 19th century, industrial society neither expected nor wanted women to engage in labor, but instead encouraged women to devote themselves to other roles like raising children and taking care of the house, while the husband of her family worked. Industrialization profoundly affected the childhood experience. Industrial work, which took children away from their homes and parents for long hours with few breaks. It made child labor seem especially pitiable and exploitative. Children that worked in factories were abused from dusk to dawn and beaten to stay awake while working. Yet many families depended on their children's wages in order to survive. By the 1840s, the British Parliament began to pass laws regulating child labor and had ultimately removed children from the industrial workforce.